I have the pleasure of welcoming you here today to the third session of the Bancroft Institute Research Discussion Series. Just a few words about the Bancroft Institute, if some of you don't know about us. The Bancroft Institute for Studies on Workers' Compensation and Work Injury is a collaborative of injured workers, advocates, and academics. Its goals are to address the needs and concerns of injured workers in Ontario and across Canada through community-engaged research. And we also seek to promote education and research on workers' compensation and injured worker experiences, and to inform legislation, policies, programs, and practices. We've had a few of these discussion series. This is, as I said, the third. The first was in May of 2013, and it was dedicated to the issues of poverty and injured workers. And it was entitled From Disability to Welfare. And John Stapleton was here presenting his report on the welfarization of disability. Last year, just a year ago, in October, Ron Ellis spoke to us about his new book, then new, I guess it's a year old now, Unjust by Design, and gave us an in-depth critique of Canada's administrative justice system, which includes adjudicating workers' compensation claims. In April of this year, the Bancroft Institute hosted a special workshop dedicated to examining several troubling issues facing injured workers and the adjudication and management of their claims by the WSIB. We came away from that workshop with an action plan that included tackling these issues using a number of strategies. Are we okay? 4 groups are currently working on each of these strategies, and I'll just tell you a little bit about them. One is a legal challenge based on administrative bias on the part of the WSIB, and this is looking at the feasibility of taking class action against the WSIB. The second group is looking at challenging WSIB policies on covert surveillance under the Human Rights Code. A third group is looking at using international human rights treaties, such as the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And a fourth group is studying challenging the WSIB policies and practices as in violation of its fiduciary responsibility to injured workers. You can hear an audio recording of the April workshop at www.meredith100.ca, and the 4 groups will be reporting back when there is more to discuss. The topic for today's session is interactions between injured workers and insurers in workers' compensation systems. Our keynote speakers, one of whom, Beth Kilgour, is joining us by Skype from Australia. This is very exciting. Beth, along with Dr. Kosny, will talk to us about their findings that the involvement with compensation systems leads to development of psychosocial consequences for injured workers instead of fostering recovery. As practitioners, particularly the legal clinic practitioners, we are seeing injured workers developing mental health issues in increasing and concerning numbers, and we welcome the research that has been undertaken by our guest speakers. Following the guest speakers, we will have the panel who will give their comments on some of the findings, and then hope to be able to have a discussion amongst ourselves on these issues. Just a few housekeeping announcements. The washrooms here in this lovely building are downstairs, so if go out the door to the left and down the stairs. For accessibility, you should go to the right, and there's an elevator just back here, so right and right again, and the elevator will take you down 1 floor to really the washrooms are. We have some refreshments at the back, coffee, tea, and a few snacks. There isn't a formal break in the program, so please just help yourself during the discussion. There are tokens available for the unwaged. May has the tokens at the back. And we are recording the event. The front of the room will be video recorded, but we will all be audio recorded, so just to keep that in mind, and it helps to have a record of these discussion series so that we can refer to them from time to time. We're asking for a $5 donation for those who can spare it to help with the costs of the event. So I'd like to, at this point, introduce Mary Endicott to you for a special memorial presentation.
This is a short memorial presentation for Sharon Dale Stone, Dr. Sharon Dale Stone. Sharon Dale Stone had just recently joined the Bancroft Institute when she passed away on July the 10th this summer as a result of complications arising from surgery. But we already knew Sharon from her past work with the Research Action Alliance on the Consequences of Injury, which a number of you in this room were part of. And before that, her work with the injured worker groups in Northern Ontario. Sharon was a professor and the chair of the sociology department at Lakehead University. And as an academic, she did not shy away from being an active participant in numerous social justice issues. In her pursuit of social justice, she sought out and joined forces with non-academic communities to help bring about change. I first knew her name in association with the work that she helped to produce on the role and value of peer support groups for injured workers. It was a participatory research project. It's interesting to look at that work. I brought a copy of it with me today. It's called Connecting for Change. In light of our topic of today about the psychological consequences of work injury. And as part of the discussion, here's something that she observed in this study. The focus group data clearly showed that injured workers are looking for help and support, and they look to a diversity of sources. They variously look to their families, friends, employers, supervisors, co-workers, unions, health professionals, and other service providers, and other injured workers. Not all of these people, however, are in a position to offer the support that injured workers need. The data plainly show that of all the various people that injured workers turn to for support, other injured workers consistently give the most useful help. Thus, those injured workers who are already acquainted with other injured workers generally find that it is in their casual conversations with each other that they learn the most useful information and find the most empathy. And then she goes on to talk about, well, you can't have a situation where people are just available to discuss all these terrible things that are happening because people burn out. And she puts forward, through the study, along with the group, the proposal for peer support groups with the people who are part of those peer support groups to be trained to be participants in that. And I was thinking it was interesting that it may be after hearing today's presentation that Sharon's work will speak to us again and find an ongoing place in our efforts to improve the lives of injured workers. At the table at the back, you'll see a flyer. There's a memorial coming up for Sharon in Thunder Bay with a number of interesting talks that will be given at that memorial, and one of the people who's speaking is Becky Casey, who is also part of our group here. Here's a copy of one of the topics is really fascinating. It's a chronic illness and the Canadian knowledge worker, the role of the body and embodiment in shaping the production of academic work. That sounds really interesting. The others do too. Anyway, the Ontario Network of Injured Worker Groups always takes a minute of silence at the beginning of its meetings to think of those who have passed and of those who are struggling with the effects of permanent injury or illness. And I'd like to ask us to take a minute now to remember Sharon Dale Stone. And I think that Sharon would be pleased if we allowed our thoughts to drift while thinking of her, to thinking of injured workers and their families and how we can engage to make their lives better, something that she strove to do. So if we could just take a minute of silence. Thank you. Ivana, are you coming back up?
Okay, so it's actually my pleasure to introduce our two guest speakers for today. Our first one, Beth Kilgour, as Ivana mentioned, is being brought in from Australia, where I believe it's 1 a.m. So we really appreciate it on Saturday or Sunday morning, possibly. So we just really appreciate her coming and doing this for us through Skype. Beth Kilgour is completing her PhD at the Institute of Safety, Compensation and Recovery Research, as well as the Department of Epidemiology, and Preventive Medicine at Monash University, which is in Australia. Her research focuses on the experiences and interactions of injured workers and psychologists in the workers' compensation system. Beth is a registered counseling psychologist and specializes in rehabilitation psychology. She has over 20 years of clinical experience assisting people with recovery following transport accidents and work-related injuries. So Beth Kilgour will be our first speaker. We'll be talking a bit about her work, and then our Dr. Agnieszka Kosny, and I call it Iggy, will be also speaking. She's a scientist at the Institute for Work and Health. She has a PhD in public health sciences from the University of Toronto. She has over 12 years of experience using qualitative research methods and exploring occupational health and safety and workers' compensation issues. She was recently in Australia for a 2-year sojourn at Monash University, but we're very pleased to have her back at the Institute for Work and Health here in Toronto. She returned to her position as scientist at the Institute starting this past August. So Iggy's research interests focus on immigrant workers, return to work after injury, and the functioning of the workers' compensation system. So without further ado, I call to the table at Iggy, and we'll bring in Beth from Skype.
I'll just say a couple of things before we get that more.
Hello, Kathy.
Yeah, hi.
Rapid name.
Hold on, Beth, just 1 second.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm just going to quickly just say a few words before you start. That's all right, Beth? Beth, I'm just going to turn you towards the audience, though, okay? So you don't have to just put it like this. Can you see everyone?
Thank you.
Okay. So I'm very pleased to share with you some of the work that Beth has been doing as part of her PhD thesis in Australia. And as Emil said, my name is Iggy Kosny, and along with Alex Colley, who's also in Australia, we supervise Beth her PhD studies. So I'm going to be talking to you about her findings from a qualitative systematic review that Beth carried out, and Alex, Donna, Kenzie, and I were all part of the research team. And as Emil mentioned, it would be wonderful to have Beth here in person, but she's in Australia, where I'm sure it's much warmer than it is here. And we just didn't really quite have the faith in technology for her to do the whole presentation. So even though this is her work, I'm going to present it on her behalf. And depending on how Beth is feeling, because towards the end of this, it'll be probably, 3 in the morning in Australia. She might, she'll do a small introduction and then might bow out and go to bed. So we'll see. She'll probably turn off the camera when she does that. But we'll see. How are you feeling, Beth? Are you tired or?
It's 1:20 Saturday morning. I'm feeling reasonably good at the moment. We'll see how we go. I think we'll end up around 3:30, so I'll see how the stamina lasts.
So don't feel like you need to hang in there if you're feeling tired, obviously. So I'll do the presentation, and then if you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them. And if you have questions that I can't answer, I also have Beth's email, so you can always email her, and I'm sure she'd be happy to either chat with you or answer any questions. And I also have some copies of both this paper and the other paper that's come out as a result of this review. So if you're interested, there's some copies in the back, and if you email me, I can also send you an electronic copy. So I'll just turn it over to Beth to say a few words about her PhD and where she works, and then we'll get on with the presentation of the systematic.
Thank you, Iggy. Good morning, everyone. Technology is wonderful. I would love to be with you there in Canada, but not to be. So I'm here in Aries Inlet, which is on the Great Ocean Road. It was 31 degrees today. Beautiful spring, almost summer coming. So I'm also very pleased to be able to contribute to your discussion today about the impact of compensation systems on injured workers. I'll provide a little bit more background about myself than perhaps Emil mentioned. As he mentioned, I've worked with as a counselling psychologist for about 22 years now with clients with injuries sustained in both work and transport accidents. I've worked in a number of clinical settings, rehabilitation hospitals and in private practice. And I've seen clients with all types of injuries, so complex long-term injuries, such as spinal injuries and acquired brain injuries, as well as the more common muscular and repetitive strain injuries as well. I've also, of course, worked with clients suffering psychological conditions related to their injury from work stress or bullying, as these injuries are funded under the Victorian Workers' Compensation System, which is the jurisdiction where I am in Melbourne. My work in the rehabilitation field has varied in roles that I have also done. So apart from personal counselling, I've also assisted clients with vocational issues, so to identify new careers for those who needed to change jobs because of their injuries, assisting with return to work, including job placement and worksite visits. I've provided case management services to help injured clients transition from hospital by organising attendant care and all other community support services so that they can live in the community. I've also worked on the legal side of things, conducting independent medical evaluations, and I've attended court as an expert witness in cases where injured workers have pursued common law. So in all the workers that I've seen, I've noticed quite a familiar pattern in the recovery path of these people. Many injured workers failed to learn to come to terms with their changed physical abilities and the different roles this would mean in their life. However, some of the greatest stresses associated with their injury came from the difficulties they had negotiating treatment and coping with the financial impacts of not being able to work. The injured clients that I saw worried about the impact on their families. They often felt that workers' compensation claims managers were not supportive and didn't understand their needs, so they found the system very difficult. These issues were similar for transport accident and injured worker clients, but the differences between the compensation systems could have significant influence on the process of dealing with it. And it was seeing this experience of the complicated responses in compensable clients that they need to take a break from work and return to study so that I could broaden my knowledge and understanding and perhaps contribute to positive change in compensation systems, the goal of improving outcomes for injured people. So I don't know if you were able to put up the slide that I brought along. I'll take it. I mean, if you're able to do that, you might see that screen. If not, it doesn't matter.
So this is what you've already spoken some of this, right? Do you want me to this slide? Oh, you can't see the slide. Is it the slide where it says background, research questions, and so on?
The busy slide,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay,
Yes.
you're good. That's up there.
I thought I'd just pop that up there for you. It is quite busy, but it explains basically what my PhD project is about. And I'll just discuss a couple of points that are there. Much of the existing research into work injury focuses on statistical measures of return to work outcomes, on assessing what treatments are most effective. However, injured workers as consumers of medical and rehabilitation services can provide so much more information about what helps and what hinders their recovery. So the design of my PhD project has developed in response to the findings that were identified in the systematic review that we're discussing today. So as mentioned previously, 2 papers have been produced, and here has a couple of copies there for you today. The second paper briefly looks at the interactions between healthcare providers and injured workers and insurers. And in summary, that paper discusses how healthcare providers can act in both a healing and a harming role with injured workers. And the interactions between healthcare providers and insurers can also negatively impact on injured workers. And I was a little surprised about some of the findings about healthcare providers, and so I decided to do further research with healthcare providers. Because mental health is such an important aspect of recovery, I chose to investigate psychologists who worked in compensable settings, and it also helps that I have direct experience in that area. So I've completed primary data collection with both groups of psychologists and also through individual interviews. And in total, I've gathered the opinions and experience of about just over 50 psychologists. As I mentioned in her introduction, work-related mental health claims are rising. So it's important to gain a better understanding of the healthcare services and the various issues associated with mental health service provision. So I think this is some timely research in an area that is so far under research. So the presentation today focuses on the interactions between injured workers and workers' compensation insurers. And this paper is that we're looking at is a product of the systematic review that was the first part of PhD. I would like to acknowledge, I think you already mentioned, but my co-authors were Alex Collin, John McKenzie, and of course Iggy. And together we bring knowledge from psychology, anthropology, community health fields, and both qualitative and epidemiological research experience. And I think that the review has benefited from our different perspectives and our different disciplines. So Alex Collin is my loan supervisor and he's CEO of Agnieszka. ISCA, the Institute of Safety, Compensation, Recovery Research, is a joint venture between the Victorian WorkCover Authority, the Transport Accident Commission and Monash University, and it also provides funding for my PH project, so I'd like to acknowledge that. I was, I believe, extremely lucky to have Peggy come and spend some time in Wood, and she stepped in as my co-supervisor midway into this review that we're discussing today. I suppose that the things that struck me most about this review of injured workers' experiences were first that the difficulties injured workers reported were universally the same. So despite different countries or different jurisdictions within the country, injured workers talked about having the same problems. The other striking finding is that it appears that not much has changed over time. One of the earliest studies in the review comes from Australia in the early 1990s, yet the issues reported that injured workers struggled with are almost identical to those in the studies that from Canada in the period around 2010. I'm pleased to see that new studies are investigating how changes to the system might affect compensable claims, and I think this review demonstrates that there's a need to generate further solutions to these long-standing issues. Hopefully, injured workers will not have the same difficulties in the next 20 years. I gave a similar presentation to a forum in Melbourne late last year. There were a range of stakeholders present, including workers' compensation and transport accident regulators, claims managers, healthcare reliers, members from the care support groups and injured workers. And findings resounded strongly with most people in attendance, and it generated some very interesting discussion. So I hope you enjoyed today's presentation, and I'm very pleased to leave you in these much competent hands. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts and questions at the end of the presentation if I can still be here with you. Thank you. Over to you, Ruby.
Beth, I think we're going to take you off screen now so we can see the slides of the presentation. And yeah, that's good. Will you tell us if you're leaving? Beth?
Yeah, she was probably muted.
Oh, read it. Okay, that's okay. Okay, doesn't matter. Anyways, we'll figure it out. Okay. It's technology. All right, so I'll just get right into it. The main questions of the systematic review were: what is the nature of interactions between injured workers, healthcare providers, and insurance personnel, or case managers, as they're known here in Ontario, within workers' compensation systems? What beliefs and impressions do injured workers develop as a result of these interactions, and are there particular interactions that are either helpful or detrimental to recovery? So I'll just tell you a little bit about the methodology. We searched 6 electronic databases for qualitative international literature published in peer-reviewed journals between 1985 and 2012. When we did the search, we identified 1,006 articles that were potentially relevant to the topic of the review. And then we reviewed all of those titles and abstracts. So that was a long process. A screening protocol was applied when we were reviewing these particular titles and abstracts. And we kept to include into the review studies that were qualitative in nature, focused on the perceptions and experiences of the injured worker related to the interactions they had with key decision makers, so either healthcare providers, case managers, and so on. The participants in the study had to have had a work-related injury or illness, and we excluded studies that were only focused on kind of vocational outcomes. So this screening process resulted in about 18 studies, and 18 studies moving forward onto what's called quality assessment. So at this point, we weren't necessarily reviewing the quality of the studies, we're just making sure that they were relevant. We also identified another 9 studies based on the reference lists from some of the studies that were kept in the review. So a total of 27 studies moved on to quality assessment. We use this framework for assessing qualitative research, which has been used in other qualitative systematic reviews that were developed in the UK in the early 2000s. So basically, 2 reviewers evaluated each article in great detail, and we sort of asked the article a series of questions about the study design, how data was collected, the analysis, the theoretical orientation, the significance of findings, and so on. And only the articles that were rated by both of the reviewers as either moderate or high quality were retained for data extraction. So those were 13 articles in total. The data extraction form we used was one that was adapted from one that Ellen McKechnie developed for her 2006 review of qualitative return to work literature, which some of you may be familiar with. So that was very useful, and we adapted that with her permission. Okay, so then we extracted the data from each of the studies. So things like the research question, the study method, sample characteristics, the timing, location of research, and just the relevance of the study content to the review questions. And the data was synthesized using an interpretive meta-ethnographic approach as developed by Norbert and Hare. So this involved the identification of key concepts within and across studies, and the construction of overarching themes, which involve the comparing and contrasting of findings across the various studies. So the systematic review findings are more than just sort of a collation of concepts from each article. The synthesis kind of involves the building upon messages in the total reviewed work. And like the previous slide said, we have the 13 studies, and they came from Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Sweden, and from the US. Okay, so I've just listed the studies that were included in the review because in case somebody wants a copy of these slides, they're all listed there. They're also listed in the paper. Across the studies and interviews and focus groups were conducted with a total of 845 injured workers. And there were also, within these studies, interviews and focus groups held with peer support workers, healthcare providers, community advocates, legal and union representatives, and some with workers' compensation staff as well. Together, the studies included injured workers from a variety of different occupations, from processing workers to clerical workers, fishermen, physiotherapists, while others looked at people who had a mix of occupations. The vast majority of injured workers had physical injury claims, especially for musculoskeletal injuries, but there were some other injuries as well, burns, crushes, respiratory injuries. And only 11 primary mental health claims, and probably this is due to the fact that some jurisdictions don't allow for primary mental health claims, so it's not really surprising. The majority of the studies focused on long-term claimants with complex injuries rather than injured workers who recovered quickly and returned to work easily to pre-injury employment. So just keep that in mind. So this might not represent the experiences of every injured worker, but because the studies, most of them did focus on longer-term, people who were longer-term claimants. Okay. So the systematic review findings were structured around 3 main topics: injured worker and insurer interactions, which is what I'll focus on today. And we identified 5 main themes that were key to these interactions. And then injured worker and healthcare provider interactions, and healthcare provider and insurer interactions. And like Beth and I both said, that some of those details are available in the paper and the 2 papers that are in the back. And if there's no more, you can always email me my contact information. You can email Beth and she can send you a copy of either of the papers. So I will start by explaining the findings about everyday interactions that injured workers had with insurers as they were trying to manage their claims. Most of the studies in the review reported that when injured workers tried to deal with insurers, they were confronted by administrative hurdles and organizational cultures that reflected disorganized systems. In 8 of the studies, injured workers had concerns with the level of professionalism of insurer personnel. I just use insurer personnel because I know that claims managers are sometimes they're called claims managers or it's called adjudicators. So we just use the term insurer personnel because it's a little bit more generic and applies to different systems. So injured workers reported instances where claim managers treated them disrespectfully, made inappropriate comments, citing conversations which included patronizing and sexist comments. Injured workers noted that some claims managers were uninformed about the system itself. So they weren't helpful in terms of workers' entitlements or particular processes because they themselves didn't have a really strong grasp of the system. Workers sometimes did not hear from case managers for months, and then there was a change of personnel, and suddenly there was a rush of decisions which the injured worker found very stressful. Administrative deficits were also mentioned in 8 of the studies. So injured workers complained that attempts to self-manage their recovery were hampered by absent or incorrect information as case managers didn't inform them of their rights. So workers weren't informed of what they were eligible for. Injured workers reported that services were approved in a haphazard fashion, and paperwork they provided was frequently lost by insurers. Payment schedules were changed or late and could be instituted without consultation for the worker. Incorrect calculation of wages and delayed receipt of reimbursement for medical expenses added financial insecurity to the effect of the physical injury. Communication difficulties were also highlighted in 7 of the studies. Injured workers reported that claims managers were difficult to contact, phone and email messages were not always returned, and this left injured workers feeling anxious while they waited to have their calls returned and their questions answered. Written communication was also problematic. So letters and forms were the standard form of communication, yet the formal letters were difficult for injured workers to understand, especially if they had low literacy or if English was their second language. And ineffective communication methods could result in prolonging and complicating claims. So this is a quote from an injured worker from a South Australian study. He says, "My case manager didn't tell me anything or help me with the process. I knew nothing about travel claims, rehabilitation, work training, or physiotherapy. They just sent out the same letters to everyone. Letters sent by case managers were threatening. The pressure was unnecessary and I would have healed quicker without it. The boundaries of the return to work process need to be examined. The lack of information is very stressful." So several of the studies have suggested that the lack of information can prompt injured workers to seek information from other sources and can influence injured workers' decisions to engage a lawyer to help advocate on their behalf to assist them in negotiating the system. And this is particularly the case in jurisdictions where common law claims are permitted. So in some of the jurisdictions in Australia, they are. Okay, so counterproductive attitudes and actions was another frequent theme which highlighted how the issue of legitimacy and adversarial relations were inextricably linked. In every study in the review, injured workers reported behaviors and attitudes of insurers which indicated a pervasive distrust towards them. This served to undermine positive relations and to fuel antagonistic relations. Injured workers were concerned that claim managers didn't listen to them, and so didn't fully understand the impact of their injuries on their lives or take into account what their individual needs were. This lack of understanding from claims managers related to both physical and psychological aspects of the injury. And as a result, workers felt that the seriousness of their injury was often underestimated or was attributed only to psychological factors. Most of the studies reported that injured workers felt they had to continually justify themselves and prove that their injuries were real, and thus developed a strong sense of injustice about not being believed by insurers. Counterproductive actions by insurers included things like the use of private investigation firms to conduct covert surveillance. And injured workers also described how claim managers monitored their activities and their daily routines by contacting and questioning relatives, neighbors, friends, and co-workers. Many of the studies noted that injured workers found these actions to be both threatening and invasive of their privacy and felt like they were being treated like criminals. Injured workers responded by withdrawing from social and physical activity, which in turn hampered their recovery and led to mental health difficulties and anger towards insurers. Injured workers claimed that insurers frequently denied or contested claims and disputed diagnoses by sending them, the injured workers, to multiple medical examinations and assessments, many of which had no therapeutic value. For complex injuries that were multi-causal and had no clear etiology or definition, injured workers found that repeated medical assessments gave rise to conflicting diagnoses and opinions, which added to the insurer's lack of understanding and could result in a denial or delay. So this is a Canadian worker who was very distraught by the surveillance he experienced. While the surveillance lasted for a month and a half, he withdrew to his basement for 3 years and only spoke to friends that he developed on shortwave radio, who couldn't see him or judge him, and became fearful of leaving his house and being seen by others. So he says, "You can't believe what it's like to be under surveillance if it's never happened to you. It destroys a person like you can't imagine, because it's a lack of respect. It gets inside of us. It's as if the person under surveillance is a liar, is a cheat, the lowest of the low in our society. That's what you are if you're under surveillance. That's pushed me almost to suicide," all of that stuff. And that came from a study by Catherine Lepel. So Lepel argues that the use of surveillance is particularly damaging as it perpetuates the stereotype that injured workers are untrustworthy and malingerers and so are deserving of suspicion. Such actions served to undermine any rapport between claims managers and injured workers and prevented the development of an understanding and supportive environment that is so important for the workers' rehabilitation and recovery. So next I'd like to talk about claims manipulation. In 10 of the studies, injured workers suspected insurers of using tactical methods or coercive techniques to reduce service provision or entitlements. Coercive behavior by insurers was suggested by injured workers who felt pressured to comply with directions from insurers that they wouldn't normally agree to if they were not reliant on the insurer for funding of income replacement or for medical treatment. 7 studies reported how injured workers felt that they were forced to comply with medical assessments and treatments that could be painful or unhelpful, or to retraining that they were not interested in, or to return to work prematurely while they were still in pain and concerned about re-injury. Recommendations by insurers for early return to work or lack of approval for treatment and surgery were considered as being fueled by a cost containment mentality, rather than by consideration of what was best for the injured worker. In a number of the studies, injured workers reported that they thought files were rotated between claim managers on a regular basis, so that individual staff would develop a sort of sympathetic understanding of the worker, and so would find it easier to deny claims. Studies describe how injured workers who had experienced difficulties and delays with the system over lengthy periods of time developed attitudes of resignation, became more skeptical and distrusting of the system, and attributed a vindictive reasoning and motivation to insurer actions. In contrast, some injured workers did report positive interactions with insurers, and these insights provide important information on how to improve relations between injured workers and insurers. So this is a quote from an injured worker in Florida. It describes what was helpful and positive. "Everything just fell into place. If I had a question, I called her, and she gave me the answer. If she couldn't give me the answer, she'd call me back in a short period of time and answer my question. The girl I worked with at Workers' Comp, she was excellent. She explained everything to me. She made sure everything was done on time, that my check came, the doctor got their checks. I had no complaints. I can only say what a great crew they were and what a great organization that is. So interestingly, for this injured worker, a positive experience with her case manager generalized a positive perception of the entire organization. Unfortunately, only a minority, 3 out of the 13 studies, reported positive interactions between injured workers and insurance personnel. It's possible that some of these positive experiences are underreported because injured workers may not have been asked directly about positive injured experiences in their interviews. But injured workers that described positive interactions said that these interactions were positive when claim managers were respectful and understanding and provided continuous contact and personalized service. When claims managers adopted a supportive, problem-solving approach, injured workers responded by viewing the claims manager as an ally. Other positive interactions mentioned included receiving clear explanations answers to questions, prompt referrals, and a timely payment of income benefits. Okay. So, unfortunately, the number of negative interactions reported by injured workers outweighed the positive. And the theme that occurred most frequently in all the 13 studies was that of psychosocial consequences for injured workers arising from their interactions with insurers. So for clarity, psychosocial consequences were divided into 2 groups. Mental health consequences, so the effect of the individual's thoughts, emotions, behaviors, and social and vocational consequences, which was the effect of the individual and how they interact with society and their employer, and which also can have a secondary effect on their mental health. So while only 11 participants across all the studies had primary mental health claims, injured workers reported experiencing mental health consequences and developed secondarily to the physical injury, and these were reported in every study in the review. Psychological difficulties reported by injured workers were many. So fears about interacting with insurers and the system, about things like medical evaluations and surveillance. Injured workers experienced anger and frustration and stress and mental anguish when they were unable to communicate with insurers about their financial concerns, which developed as a result of administrative delays. A majority of studies also reported that injured workers suffered from low self-esteem, as many were ashamed of having made a workers' compensation claim, of receiving benefits, of having failed to return to work, or not succeeding at a retraining program. Many injured workers also experienced episodes of anxiety and depression, which were exacerbated by the difficulties that they experienced trying to navigate their way through the system. Suicidal ideation was an indicator of the degree of mental anguish that injured workers experienced and was discussed in 4 of the studies. 2 of the reasons mentioned as triggers for suicidal thoughts were fighting with the system and the use of surveillance. Injured workers also reported social and vocational consequences. So financial stress and poverty was reported by injured workers in 10 of the studies. Delays in acceptance of claims and receipt of benefits could mean that injured workers were unable to pay mortgages and were forced to sell their cars or their homes. And defaults on loans resulted in negative credit ratings, which remained long after appeals had been won and the claims had been finalized. So you see this kind of persistent effect. Lower incomes also compounded difficulties in family life and highlighted injured workers' inability to perform past roles as a parent or spouse, as social outings and extracurricular activities became unaffordable luxuries. The inability to remain socially engaged added to the isolation of the worker and exacerbated low mood and impaired self-esteem. So, this is a quote from one of the workers. which I think sums up sort of some of the mental health and social and financial consequences of having a workers' compensation claim. Hurting yourself at work has a stigma, and I felt I was to blame. No one told me anything. There was no plan. The insurer and the case manager was inexperienced, ignorant, and arrogant. I was totally stressed, and my mental state was far worse than the injury at the end of the claim. My pay was mixed up for weeks, and receipts were lost. It all made me feel fearful, and the fact that nobody listened to me had the biggest impact. I was very worried about how I would feed the family, and I felt very depressed, but received no help or counseling. I had problems with the mortgage, and I began to mistrust everyone connected to my case. The process almost drowned me. So, starting at the top and working clockwise, the above diagram illustrates how several of these themes from the review interact. In prolonged claims, the insurer may become concerned about legitimacy of the injured worker and may send the injured worker for multiple assessments to clarify work-relatedness or injury issues. This can result in adversarial relations between various parties and can also create difficulty in getting a diagnosis, as multiple medical opinions often produce conflicting diagnoses. If the diagnosis is unclear, the injured worker can have difficulty accessing treatment and can experience delays in obtaining both approval and appointments for treatment or surgery. Delayed or incorrect treatment can influence not only the chronicity of the injury, but also the mental health of the injured worker. This process adds further stressors, and psychological illness can develop secondary to the physical injury. And subsequently, concerns about legitimacy of the injured worker can arise. And so the cycle continues and the injured worker deteriorates further. So, in conclusion, the synthesis of these studies can be summarized as having identified that significant mental health, social, and vocational consequences can arise for injured workers as a result of their interactions with insurers in the workers' compensation system. Rather than receiving efficient and effective rehabilitation, injured workers, especially long-term claimants, find delays and denials are frequent, and interactions with insurers and the system are often negative, and this serves to complicate their recovery. Although in this cohort of studies, the negative interactions outweigh the positive, a benefit of knowing what is not working is that it helps to define the pathways towards finding what will work. Further research suggestions that can add pieces to solve the puzzle of how to improve the experiences of injured workers in the workers' compensation system may include an investigation into the experiences and opinions of people who have shorter-term claims and who recover quickly and return to work quickly. And this may reveal what worked well with them and allow for duplication and generalization of successful strategies to other claimants. Investigation into the opinions and experiences of insurance personnel may also provide another perspective and generate unique contributions that can improve interactions with injured workers.
Beginning immediately beside me here at this end of the table, we have Dr. Leslie Carrawley. Dr. Carrawley has worked as a psychiatrist in the East Toronto community for the past 35 years. He's a member of the Canadian Society of Medical Evaluators, and he has a special interest in medical, legal, and insurance work. He's consulted for the WSIB, but he also has very extensive experience in working with injured workers. Immediately beside Dr. Carrawley is Beryl Brown. Beryl is an injured worker and a long-time injured worker activist. She's part of the Great Lakes Injured Workers Group, which meets at our clinic, Injured Worker Consultants, but she comes from Richmond Hill. She's the Toronto Regional Representative on the Ontario Network of Injured Workers Groups. Beside Beryl is Debbie Colson. Debbie is the Assistant Director of Social Services for the International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 793, which is in Oakville. Debbie's got extensive experience in assisting injured workers, and she's active in the Ontario Federation of Labor's Workers' Compensation Committee. Beside Debbie is Professor Perry Valentine. Perry teaches in the Department of Sociology at Trent University in Peterborough. She's a health sociologist, and she's interested in the social determinants of health, among other things. Perry was very involved in our RACV research, the Research Action Alliance on the Consequences of Work Injuries, that has just recently wrapped up. And she did in that an extensive study of the health of injured workers with work impairments. And at the other end of the table there is Joanne Kearns. Joanne is an injured worker and also a long-time injured worker activist. She comes from Georgetown, but she was very active in getting the very injured workers group going while she was living there. Joanne is the Central Ontario region representative of the Ontario Network of Injured Workers Groups. And so we've asked the panel to listen to the presentation today and to comment just for a few minutes. What struck them about the presentation today? How does that fit with your experience or your work? And what strikes you about the next steps in this? Are there further steps that need to be done to address the issues that we've seen today? And so what we'll do, I suppose, microphone's sort of there. And why don't we just go across the table, we'll start with Dr. Corrali since you've got the microphone, if that's all right with you. And we'll just let you speak and pass the microphone along.
Thank you very much. Obviously, what we have heard is extremely important because all of these issues are not communicated properly and not couched in a research format loses its meaning, loses its strength, and it's such an important topic. Currently I have about 60 open charts following patients with work injuries, all of whom have been in the system, meaning the WSIB system, for anywhere from 20 some odd years still struggling to get benefits to 7 years. I have several anecdotes, but for the interest of time, I must say that all of these themes and key concepts I feel are very, very helpful. And there may be some method of having a brochure or some teaching. On Halloween, that's very small. And so is the talk.
C'est le temps de vous présenter notre tout nouveau yogourt grec avec fruits au fond.
So right away my thought is how can this be helpful, and certainly the shared experience seems to be vital, and when people are suffering and they are perceive injustice, and often there has been injustice, to know that research has also found that it is a shared experience may be helpful. So I don't know how this can be made use of in a publicized or pamphlet form, but that's sort of my first thought. How can this trickle down to the injured worker in terms of a tangible benefit, this research, these findings? Not every injured worker can come into a support group, which is very, very helpful in our practice. We have that. But anything we can do to help these people struggling would be very helpful. I just want to give voice to just a couple of the patients who I've worked with. One is Mike, who after 14 years of struggling with trying to get benefits, has highlighted some of the injustices of the system. You know, he says everything is complicated when you deal with the WSIB. I wouldn't understand. I had to hire an agent. He took 25% of what he retrieved. It took me 14 years to get settlement. He went on to say that they lowball everything, they are sneaky, they hold back money, they make mistakes in their favor, they were not mistakes. These statements, I feel, capture quite well the feelings of mistrust that pervades the system. Mistrust of the worker, is he faking it? The mistrust of the claimant, who has these negative experiences. I'm convinced, as the research shows, that the interactions patients have with the system are very critical in either helping the healing process or standing in the way of being re-traumatized by abuse. So with those few words, I wanted to pass on the mic. However, I did want to preface that I believe most of the adjudicators are very well intentioned, and they don't wake up in the morning and say, how am I going to hurt the injured workers? So they have a very difficult job, and it is a shared responsibility of the caregivers to give very good medical evidence, to the legal profession to give excellent legal service, to the family of the injured workers to support them, and of course the insurer.
What struck me most from the research that we heard is not, it is the fact that it's a universal situation. It's not only like in Canada. And the commonality of the injured worker experience with the insurer, or in our case WCB, is so common. I can associate all of the findings. I have been through it. I'm still going through it. Where our credibility, is discredited. We are seen as malingers. We are seen as just people out there wanting to get free money, and nothing is wrong. From my personal experience, I have struggled with the WSIB since 1999 until now. It took me this time for WSIB, so just since last October, to recognize some of my disabilities. For example, my psychological disability. They want to ignore it, nothing is wrong with me. They did not even honor, how did they come to the manner to acknowledge my impairment. They denied me access to medical care. I wouldn't have been in this situation with chronic depression if they had attended to me earlier. I exhausted all my financial needs. My family, they too. My brother, credit rating fell because of my dependence upon him. He has to use his credit card to see that I have food on my table and to go to my treatments. And I feel so guilty today to see him struggling to pay off his debts, incurred because of me, to support me. Never said be careless. The only one thing, and the soul, I wouldn't say a soulless, but in one sense, it's a soulless for me, that my care providers, medical care providers, they were really, really good. They understand my situation. And many times, I felt so guilty to be stretching my hands out to them to receive the sample medications to keep me going. It took me 6 years to have a hearing at the appeals division. Then it took 1 year to get the report from that hearing, which is 7 years. And then I waited again another 8 months before they finally listened to me by compensation, and partial compensation for multiple areas of claim. And that was just for a short time, just 4 months. Then they forced me into LMR.
And then 12 years, and after that, they gave me help. The first time after the 7 years. Then 4 or 5 months after, nothing. 12 years after that, they gave me the LOE for 4 months. And which was just like chicken feed money. Then they forced me LMR, which I said, I'm sorry for repeating myself, in 2011. Despite their own psychovocational experts' testimony and my doctors that I wasn't a fit candidate for that retraining at the time. I was in constant pain. I'm still having a problem, mental block, and other situations. I lost my rented apartment. I had, we cried. I lost it. I had to depend on family all over again. They never took that in consideration. They deemed me. They cut off that money that they were giving me. And you know what they replaced it with? $24 per week. How can I survive off $24 per week? That's how inhumane the system is. That's how low they brought us to. And I am so grateful for the researchers that are under doctors who genuinely know that it is a systemic problem at the board. And I genuinely know that we are human beings and should be treated with dignity. And I just want to thank all those who are involved in this research and work here, who have worked here at heart. I want to say thank you very much. And these injustices have to be brought to the attention of a broader society. That we are not maligners. I am not one. I worked. Although if I never worked, I wouldn't be injured. I wouldn't. I was an honest person working for my daily living and to uphold my dignity and pride. They robbed me. They have me under surveillance. I went into church and they're there sitting in the congregation watching me. For what? I don't know. I'm not a thief. I'm not. I'm sitting here right now and even my very clothes touching my body, it hurts. I have an invisible injury, several injuries to my body. And see me walking here at 2 weak feet, nobody seems to understand what I'm going through. I'm ashamed to be sick. It's sad to say that, but I'm ashamed. I'm just going to wrap up now. And just give you an example of how the system has broken me down and has robbed me of my dignity and my pride. I remembered clearly when we called the WSIP to get my psychological, my medication for my depression. They denied me the access of that. It was several medical reports and several calls from my red pen letters. And when they finally got through to it, the medication that was working well for me, they said, we won't cover that. The board won't cover that medication. Go back to your doctors for them to give you a different one. And they picked out the one medication that they thought would be for me. How dare the WSIP should do that? They become the practitioners now, the medical practitioners. They become the treating doctors. And that medication that they suggested me to get, we had no choice than to try it out. Lots of side effects. So this is how low the system is and how careless they are. They don't care about us. Wrapping up this thing, sorry, it is so long. WSIP has ruined my credit rating history. I have none. I declare bankrupt. I lost everything I have. The system is negative towards the workers, humiliating, oppressive, disrespectful in most cases. I feel abused. My human rights to dignity, to a dignified life, and no privacy has been taken away because of the WSIP. I feel abandoned by them. I am isolated because of them from family, from social functions, from even myself, isolated from myself. But the self that I knew I had, I'm no longer that person. So I'm even afraid of my own self. I am angry that the system, a system like that our country speaks so highly about, that they won't leave anybody behind and we're all equal. It's a lie. I am left behind. Nobody cares. They drove me from a person of value. I still value myself as a human being, yes. But the dream that I have, my expectations, they're all taken away because of my situation with the SIB. And I just want to say that unless we continue to fight for justice, unless we continue to be united, unless we continue to remember that we are all human beings, should be treated with dignity and pride, this system will forever be doing more harm to injured workers than good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Beryl. Listening to Beryl, that's exactly how my day usually starts out, the phone. It's an injured worker who is broken from this system. And I get to have the luxury of being in a union environment where I have a safety net so that I can move them over. When the WSIB says, you know, they can go back to work, but they can't, we can move them over to their union benefits. And I realize that that doesn't happen in the majority of cases. So I'm thankful as a rep that I have the ability, a security net. And so that, I look at that and I say, well, why do we have it, but the other insurance systems don't? And I don't know the answer to that. But I am excited about this, this research because I hope it's going to open the eyes of the insurance providers. I typically work in the construction industry, and in the construction industry, I've seen more big burly men cry because the WSIB has stripped them of everything that they have. And we don't report psychological, we don't talk about depression and you know, how I'm feeling in the construction industry. My goodness, these are strong men. We don't talk about that. And that's been one of our biggest barriers, but it's happening. And I think that it's going to continue to happen. It's going to get worse as we send our workers to these independent medical exams, and the examiner, you know, sends back the assessment and says, you'll be okay in 12 weeks. Doesn't even have to see that person again, but they know they'll be okay in 12 weeks. It's sad. And the other thing is with the return to work in construction, we haven't had it up until 2009. We simply retrain those workers, okay, into, you know, low-paying jobs because they are high-paid with low education. Where do we group them in? Minimum wage. And so there's still a big problem for the insurance providers because there's a partial benefit. Let's fast forward when, you know, 2009, we introduced now, you know, more stringent reemployment obligations for that industry. And the higher impact of a lost time claim to their employer. We're now moving them back into jobs, and they don't even have the personal characteristics to do, and highly unlikely that it's going to be sustainable for them. So my experience with that industry is that, you know, we're still not even you know, giving them the proper training to get the job. So moving forward, what I hope is that this does go to WSIB, that they can see that this is what is happening, and we can start working on it. Because, like I say, I know our insurance system, if you can't do your job and you've got, you know, a mental health professional that's saying that, we believe you. Why wouldn't we? The other thing is we know the jobs in our industry. The WSIB has no idea of what most people do. And in order for them to be able to return that worker to some kind of productive, meaningful work, and please let's have it be productive and meaningful, because I believe that everybody can return to work in some capacity. Maybe not 40 hours a week, but what's wrong with 20 hours a week? Give them time to heal and proper treatment, and maybe we'll get to 40 hours a week. That's what we're about. We give our members that. You know, if the WSIB cuts them off treatment, we can give them the treatment. Why can't that be for everybody? And I think if we can have a model where we listen to the individual, we respect what they're saying, how they're feeling. And one thing that resonates with me when my workers go into the retraining, which is typical, the psychovocational assessment that's done. Why do we do it? Why does the WSIB do it? They don't pay attention to it. They don't even, they don't even utilize it, but it tells us the story, the personal vocational characteristics of this worker, and how we should be looking at retraining them. I have 60-year-olds that the WSIB has in those private training courses. They've been working in construction for 40 years, and now I'm going to have them working as customer service reps. Get this, how they do their, construction workers are up early in the morning. That's just how we do it, right? His training starts at 7 o'clock at night. He's in bed at 8 o'clock at night because he's used to being up in the morning. Thank you to the researchers, because when the injured workers will always say to me, so-and-so is treating me disrespectfully. And what is interesting to me is that as soon as we notify the insurance provider that we're their representative, it changes. And I'm not sure if the researchers noticed that, if there was a difference between injured workers who were represented and injured workers that were not. I feel that part of my job as an advocate is to partially, it's not my job, but I feel like I'm doing this a lot. I'm doing the case manager's job. I'm explaining the decision. I'm providing them with alternative solutions. And with the work reintegration program, I feel like now I need to become a vocational specialist to help the WSIB manage that. Thank you for having me. This has been great. I hope that we can open up the compensation system's eyes, for sure. Thank you.
Good morning. I have many comments. I'll start with commending Elizabeth Kilgour and her colleagues for the high quality of this research and for producing such a stellar document of evidence about what 845 injured workers' everyday experiences are. And I appreciated the distinction the authors made at the start of the paper about the research that's been done, focusing on return to work outcomes and other sort of quantitatively measurable outcomes of the WC process. And I think the quality of this work and the meta-ethnographic methodology used to pull together findings from these disparate studies is really valuable. I encourage all of you to get a copy of the article and have a look at it. It's a great resource because all the methods are there, the articles are there, etc. Can you hear me okay? I was saddened by the findings, but not at all surprised. We can add Beryl's story to be the 846th person spoken about today. Unfortunately, these are familiar stories to many of us who've been doing research in this area. I was disappointed to see that there couldn't be any parsing out of experiences by country, that across a number of countries, findings were similar. I have thought, as I sat and listened to you, Nikki, and having read the paper, of many future directions that research could take, including the wonderful photo voice methodologies that put cameras and video recorders in the hands of people to document their experiences. I think that visibility is so powerful. And I also thought of the methodology of institutional ethnography. If we can get researchers into the settings in which injured workers are trying to manage the trajectory of their lives after injury, that would be a challenge to get permission to get inside and to talk to the various players involved, one single case at a time. But it is an important research methodology that evaluates the discourse, the claims made about what is available, what can be done, and what actually happens to people. And we know we have at least 846, 7, 8, many more stories about a big gap between what's promised, and what's claimed, and what's documented by WSIB policy, and what actually happens to people. But of course, we've been collecting that in many ways for a long time. I mostly thought about the disempowerment, the powerlessness that we hear about injured workers who become entrenched in systems where they lose control, and this of course was one of your themes. But I thought about all the various parties involved in the trajectories of adjudicating injured worker claims for long-term claimants and permanently impaired workers who are involved and who have more power. So particularly who came to mind are injured worker adjudicators, or what you call insurers. These are human beings who live in a system in which surely they must feel to some extent they're powerless. And surely they have important stories to tell us about how they manage themselves in that kind of adversarial environment, and what they would see as more positive ways to go. Actually, another important group are workers who move through the system really well and really positively, and I appreciated the comment made that we don't know if the studies reviewed ask people particularly about their positive experiences, but I think that's important, and I think you mentioned it, to document what works well for people and to emphasize it in every possible public forum and to the various worker compensation systems around the world that this works well. I know there's been a little bit of work done about healthcare professionals, and I think their voice is really powerful and important as well. We did hear in this article, and all of us know, any of us who talk to physicians and other healthcare professionals who work within the system or outside of it, giving reports about injured workers, that they're frustrated by the system themselves. And individual healthcare practitioners have limited capacity to act, to do anything about the systemic problem in which they're forced to work. But I'm surprised that the medical associations, for example, the Ontario Medical Association, wouldn't be interested in hearing about what's happening in this system and the contradictory position that this group of workers, physicians in particular, are pushed into and forced into, because physicians are a very powerful occupational group and they get what they want when they stand and speak with a voice, a collective voice. And I'm surprised that this hasn't happened yet with around the injured worker issue. I think it's because it's too invisible, that people who are the most hurt and most harmed become invisible people in society, and we don't see them and hear enough about them. So that issue of getting the reason to do research about what we already know is happening and many injured workers know is happening out there is so important to get voice and visibility to this issue. There's important advocacy being done by some physician groups on poverty, for example, right here in this city and in this province. So the Canadian Physicians Against Poverty group comes to mind, and the Health Providers Against Poverty, which I think is an Ontario group, comes to mind. It would be interesting to have discussions with leaders in those groups about this particular issue, because poverty is a clear outcome of this kind of experience. I think there's a need for other kinds of advocacy, and I'm surprised that there isn't an injured worker ombudsperson nominated, or a position defined by the Ministry of Labour. Surely there's a place for someone to be the mediator between the system and the relatively powerless injured worker. So I think the Ministry of Labour has some role to play here. I'm surprised that we can go on and on and on and on year after year and see things get worse, not better, and people's human civil rights suspended, basically. So I'm surprised at that. I guess that I'll stop there because we want to have some time for questions, but I think there's many directions to go, and we need to involve voices of powerful groups, powerful activist groups. One more group that comes to mind is the one that John Stapleton knows a lot about, and that is around disability rights advocates and activists. And we need to bring into alignment the needs and experiences and energies of injured worker advocates with disability rights advocates, because we're really speaking here about injured workers who retain an injury and have a permanent and ongoing impairment that affects their lives. And that difference between an impairment and a disability is, sort of false. And we need to be collecting people's energies and efforts together to bring this issue to visibility. Thank you.
Wow, I might need to be the first person on the panel next time. I think there's nothing in my notes that hasn't already been said, so but I'm thinking back to it. I believe John said the panel discussion was, the purpose of the panel was to get a discussion going with everyone. So maybe that's where I'll go. I'm looking around the room, and I'm looking at a lot of people who I see my mentor in the back corner, and he says talk from the heart. So I will, and I think back to last week or 2 weeks ago when we were at Joan Egan's retirement, and Catherine LaPelle made a comment that Joan Egan told her never to apologize. So I'm not going to apologize to you because I'm an injured worker, and no, my focus isn't good. So if this is all over the place, you'll probably be able to keep up with me as an injured worker. For those who are used to a more, point form in order conversation, I apologize, but this is me. No, I'm not going to apologize. See, I told you, no focus, right? Anyway, I started out thinking I wanted to talk to you about how the anger just accumulates, and as well as how that leads into exclusion and stigma and the depression, and there's the whole factor of the doctor that you trust with your very children's lives is suddenly not a valid source for your own personal injuries. But I think everybody here is really, like I said, covered that. So where do we go with this? The research is phenomenal, and I thank each and every person that does the research, and I also thank each and every person that does the advocacy. There's so many people out there that are supporting injured workers. We're not getting the message out there, though. We're not getting the message out to the common person. The people that we used to work beside are not getting it. really. They think they're covered, right? Until you get into the system, and then you realize, well, if it's a short-term thing, if you break an arm and it mends, and you go back to work and everything's fine. But I think a month ago, we went to the Audio Research Committee went to the Work Disability Prevention Intervention, and they were presenting tools on return to work. And they were showing consistently worldwide 80% recovery. 80%. So even those individuals who are able to get back into the workforce aren't being returned to their normal self. And I think this is a significant part of what's being missed. I also think that the significant part of what's being missed is the fact that it's those long-term claims that go on and on and on, cost money. And it is not the injured party, it is not the work disability that should be faulted for that. And we certainly shouldn't have to deal with the victim-blaming society. I was in a good mood when they put me on LMR, and I got to talk to my third-party individual, and I guess through that good mood, and I think Catherine Lapel kind of hit on it a couple of weeks ago when she said that what I perceived as being something my mom says, you know, you catch more flies with honey. And so this particular work trainer and I had a few jokes and a few laughs and everything, and somehow I managed to get myself into university. And today I get to use that university for my favorite passion, which is let's do something for injured workers. Jansen is a political, social policy writer, and he writes about how if you want to be a lobbyist or if you want to be involved in that particular type of arena, you need to have a network, you need to have credibility. And I ask you today how an injured worker can have any kind of credibility when they can't volunteer for anything. You can't. If you volunteer, they'll say, well, you know, you can work, right? Whereas they forget that there was a freedom of time, there was a freedom of choice in there that you could make it so. When I volunteer for AudiWig, I do it on my good days. You know, what an employer is going to accept that. And they don't seem to realize these things. So we are, as injured workers, very much at a loss, I think, sometimes, and very inexperienced, and without opportunity to use the research. And it's some very wonderful research that's coming out. And we are also, I think, at times at a loss because, as Debbie pointed out, you know, minimal education, and then any education or training that we're getting is certainly, you know, maybe GED to, you know, get us to grade 12 in the majority of places. I, except for the grace of God, haven't figured out how I got 4 years of university of it. I really don't know how. You know, and it's rare, I know that. And yesterday at the OCAL conference, Director Whitmer actually stood up in front of a crowd of people and told them about today's training that they're sending people to college and university. And I just wanted you to know I walked her out the door. What, no laugh? Come on, I walked her out the door, literally. Sorry. I tried to make you laugh. Anyway, I guess where am I going with this is I have to say to the researchers, I mean, again, thank you very much. Some really valuable information. How do we use it? When, first of all, I think a lot of us don't understand the difference between a double-blind or a cohort. Many people wouldn't know what N equals. So I'm just, I guess, saying that injured workers need a bit of an opportunity to learn how to do or learn more about the methodology of research a little bit so we can read the research better and pull out the key points that we want. But we also, I think, need researchers to help us, very much so. We need research mentors and we need opportunities. We don't have the opportunity, I don't have the opportunity to go on to get my master's. And I'm certainly a construction worker that hasn't gone grade 12 doesn't have an opportunity. So I'm going to throw that one out to everybody as a thought. We really do need to partner. And last but not least, I'm going to finish off with participants, because we talked about that. We talked about it, short-term claims, long-term claims, but also a lot of research is coming out that's being done using claimants. So it's not involving the denied claims. It doesn't involve those people that the employer has said, oh, don't worry about it, I'll take care of you. The ones that are afraid to say anything because they have a bonus if they have 0 safety days. And if they report an injury, their entire working crew is not going to get a bonus. Who wants to work in that environment? You know, so there's so many, so even the statistics, I mean, I think, personally, I would like to see, and I've heard other injured workers or other injured worker advocates state that it would be really great if we could do some sort of survey that brought out you know, who is not included in these surveys. So that would be, like, I think, a really great place to start. The other one was words. The Ontario Network of Injured Workers Research Committee came away from the conference a month ago with a word called catastrophize. I can't even say it. Catastrophization. Injured workers catastrophize. Have I catastrophized enough today? I'm sorry. Wait. We're all, I'm not going to apologize because I don't. I'm telling you the truth, right? And Debbie, you talked about, to go back to that, you talked about the easing into work, you know, and we're in this early return to work thing, and it's a 12-week program. You work so many hours the first 2 weeks, and then they add 2 more hours, and then, you know, by the end of it, you're up to, and everything's hunky-dory. What do you mean you can't do it? And we've all heard it. But I spoke yesterday to Ms. Whitmer, and I was talking about, I was stupid, I said something about a job downtown Toronto and that I didn't want to drive and spend 3 hours in traffic. And she, of course, did not comprehend or understand that having not worked for how many years and having mental, dealing with the mental as well as the physical, and, you know, okay, I just drove across Toronto and I'm in pain. So how am I supposed to do from my home out rural into town every day, and, you know, just jump right in and start a 40-hour work week, you know? So, and she of course twisted it, and they always have a good answer for everything, because apparently she does that every day. Thank you. So I guess I think I'm gonna end on that because you were laughing, but it's just, yeah, words. If we can do something about the words, because they're stigmatizing and they're biased, and maybe if we start there, we could begin to stand up for ourselves a little better.